You're listening to Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair professionals. This week's podcast is proudly brought to you by Narva and their new SureFit LED globes, a direct halogen replacement ideal for your everyday vehicle. I'm your host, Jason Owen. Today we're joined by James Pearson, who is the Category Manager at Narva Australia. Welcome to the show, James. Good to have you along.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
And joining us once again from sunny Melbourne, I understand.
Not so sunny, but yes, we're all in here, locked down as always.
Well, you're inside today, mate. You're not catching the sun rays like they are up in Sydney. And and today we're going to be talking about the past, the present and the future of globes. And, mate, I've been a bit excited to talk to you about this one because I know we've got a lot of history with lighting here in Australia and lighting needs in the automotive side of things. So how about we just bounce straight into it? What do you reckon? You ready to go?
That's good. Let's go.
Okay, so this is the no-brainer question. Just a bit of a warning on this one. Why was there a need for globes in the automotive side of things?
So obviously, first and foremost, we need to be able to see in the dark. But if you think about the first horse-drawn carts, they were probably running a kerosene lamp or something similar to that. If you're going at horses, if you're travelling at the speed of a horse, you probably don't need to see much further. But as the vehicles have become faster, obviously that requires more light so you can see where you're going and you're not going to hit anything, and that's where the globe comes in.
Yeah, right. I can't really see them putting a light bar on a horse, but I kind of understand what they were doing, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, but that's an interesting one. Well, how did Narva get involved in globes?
So Narva was created back in the late 40s, 1940s.
Yep.
And they got into globes after that. One of the great things is that Narva actually invented the HB3, HB4 globe, specifically for the US market. So you see them in a lot of the American cars and now a lot of the Japanese and Korean cars. So that's sort of one of the first things that Narva did in terms of creating a new globe type. Okay,
no worries. And where did Narva name come from? I mean, does it have a meaning? Is it an acronym? What's the go?
It does. So just a little bit of background. Like I said, Narva was established in 1948,
yep.
And they made their first halogen bulb in 1969.
Oh, wow.
And they started producing a H4 halogen in 1974. So very good history there. Narva actually means nitrogen, argon in a vacuum.
Oh, okay.
So if you add those two, nitrogen plus argon plus halogen, and that will be the composition of the very first halogen or incandescent globes.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, it's that sort of technology is amazing, but when you form it into a name, it's a bit of a no-brainer when you actually say it the way you're sort of saying it. What were the main milestones that evolved globes over the years?
So I think the biggest change or vehicle design that causes the globes to change is the size of the headlamp. So what happens is traditionally people have used, or the manufacturers have used, nice big headlamps, one on each side, which means you need to have a high beam and a low beam, which is where the H4 comes in, works really well, and it also is very efficient and long life. But as the car designers have decided to make more stylish vehicles with smaller headlamps, the H4 doesn't work anymore. So that's when newer globe types come along, like your H7, for example.
Right.
And in terms of performance globes, that's also been driven by the OEs as they try and make these fancy-looking headlights. They actually don't work as well. The traditional H4 generally work pretty well, but as we go smaller, sometimes the light isn't as good, so people want to be able to see.
Well, in regards to that, I'm just sort of thinking back for a second because we went from those large headlamps of those early sort of 30s and 40s cars and we sort of started to scale it down. And I remember, people were having protectors and mesh protectors put across everything, and then we went to those little H4s, and now we're going smaller again. As we move forward, has the glass design and the styling design have to give you an opportunity to change bulbs?
It has. So there's two types of glass used in bulbs. There's a quartz glass or a hard glass. Now,
yep.
Both work really well. Traditionally, Narva's used hard glass. Actually, we're the first manufacturer to use hard glass in a H7.
Right.
Which was in 2006. Now, there is a lot of debate. Some people will tell you quartz is better. Some people will tell you that hard glass is better. However, it really depends on the application. So quartz glass has a much higher melting and softening temperature.
Right.
However, this is often overkill. So especially on a standard globe, hard glass actually has more than enough temperature in it to make sure it doesn't fail with the temperature. Where hard glass is actually better is it has a more precise seal around the bottom of what we call the moly foil,
Yes.
which means that for us, the worst thing that can happen to a globe is for the gas to escape and the outside air to get into the envelope. Just to give you a bit of an idea, if you and I don't suggest anyone do this, if you take the glass away from, say, a H4 globe and fire it up, it'll probably last for 10 or 15 seconds. That gas inside that globe is doing all the work. So if we lose that gas, the globe's going to fail within probably seconds, if not minutes.
Right. So the exposure just basically cooks them up. Well, what do the globes look like today? I mean, what are the main differences since their inception? Is it just the glass?
The gas composition is the real other main thing that's changed. So again, as we try and push performance globes further and further, the gas composition is really important because it's what's protecting the filament. So Narva's most highest performing bulb is a plus 150 bulb. Now, it's obviously significantly brighter and more light on the road than a standard globe. If you just ran that with the standard gas composition, again, we're probably talking, less than 5 hours of life. Now, what we have to do is we have to get that to an acceptable level. We can't physically achieve the same life as a standard. It's not possible.
Right.
So what we do is we use an increased gas pressure, but also a higher concentration of what we call inert gases. So the main one, and the reason these globes are so expensive is because we use a compound called xenon.
Yes.
And this actually works in two ways. It sort of works a little bit like bubble wrap. So it wraps the filament, stops the actual tungsten from evaporating, but also it makes the halogen reaction, which is where the tungsten filament evaporates into the gas and then is redeposited back onto the filament. It actually makes that much more efficient, which is why we use these large inert gases, and that's why they're expensive, because xenon is one of the least abundant chemicals in the world, especially in terms of gas.
Hence the price accordingly.
Yes.
Look, there's obviously a large and growing car park, affected by a lot of different globe variants and requirements. How have you guys responded to that? I mean, how do you rise to the challenge of so many new vehicles and so many new wants and needs?
Yeah, so the good thing for us is generally as an aftermarket supplier, we do get a bit of a lead time, because if there's a new globe type that comes out in a vehicle, generally it's sort of at least 4 years before we see it required any volume at all in the aftermarket, because it obviously, generally is under warranty with the manufacturer.
Yes.
But we're always keeping an eye on the trends. We're looking at what's new. For example, H11 globe has really taken off recently, and it's probably soon going to pass the humble H1 as the third most abundant globe.
Wow, okay.
But also we've seen some even newer globe types, so a H15, which is used in some of the newer vehicles, and especially probably one to keep an eye on is the HIR2, which is a globe that's used especially in a car like a Corolla. So it's in the Toyota Corolla, which means there's plenty of them out on the road. The interesting thing about that vehicle is that globe is that it's a single filament globe that actually acts like a twin filament globe, because there's actually a shutter inside the headlamp there, which can switch between high and low beam. So that's a really interesting globe. And that HIR2 in volume has doubled every year for the last 4 years.
Wow.
So if you can imagine 100, 200, 400, 800, but obviously that's not the number. But yeah, it's becoming very, very popular. And shortly, Narva is going to be releasing one of the first ever performance globes in that HIR2, which is a really good step forward as well.
I'm going to throw a quick question at you that's a little bit off script at the moment, but I have no doubt you'll be able to answer it. The technology we're seeing in the new vehicles and the new gases and so forth we're using, are you looking at doing retrofit for older vehicles with this technology as well?
So we do bring this technology back into our H4s and our H7s because, again, in Australia, just under 80% of the globes that are sold in the whole country are either H4 or H7.
Okay.
So definitely we want to keep the technology in that sort of space. But really, absolutely we are. And, obviously the other one, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a minute, is LED, which
Yeah.
is obviously coming fast as well.
It's a pretty exciting time when you think about it. I mean, we've talked to a lot of different manufacturers today, and lighting is one of those ones that, you use it for 50% of the time you're driving your car. It's a very exciting time to be in your industry right now, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that's really important, and we always talk about, is whilst you probably don't do most of your driving with your lights on, statistically, over half the crashes happen at night.
Yep.
And only, around 10 to 15% of the driving, which makes it much more dangerous, which means spending a little bit of extra money to get the right light will keep your family safe or yourself safe. So
Absolutely.
I think it's a really important topic that everyone sort of keeps an eye on.
Well, let's have a talk about behind the scenes, because, we always see the cars coming towards us. We can see the end product, but what goes on behind the scenes with the testing? What sort of testing does Narva do?
Yeah, so again, it depends a little bit upon the application. So, we make sure that the globes are fit for purpose. So, obviously, we're testing that it's compliant first and foremost. So that it meets E approval. So we test against ECE R37, which is for globes, and that means that it's for a halogen globe, it's legal. We also test its life, its light output, beam pattern, as well as other factors like vibration and what have you. So that's for a halogen globe. And then if we're talking about LED globes, it's a bit different, because there is actually no certification. So what we see in the LED space is people just making up all sorts of ridiculous figures, and it's really an unregulated space, which we disagree with. So we try and keep to some really strict testing in that sort of area of the market. An example of that is when we get a new LED globe to look at. What we do is we turn it on, we measure how much light's coming out of it,
Yep.
We leave it for an hour, and then we measure it again. So one of the most important things, I'm sure, if we're talking about LEDs, is about cooling the LED down.
Yep.
So an LED is only as good as how well it's cooled, and that's exactly the same for an LED globe. So you can have the brightest and best LED globe in the world, but if the cooling is poor, in half an hour it will be no better than any other. So
Okay.
That's where we really put a lot of our time, and that's where you make the difference between a product that works well for half an hour and a product that works well for your whole trip.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting to hear that. Let's talk about 2040, 20 years down the road. What a globe's going to look like, and how do you think that's going to affect, the workshop and the workshop manager and the mechanics? Where are we going in that space of time?
It's a really interesting question, actually, because, for a lot of years, Narva has been really one of our main categories has been halogen globes.
Yep.
Now we sort of see that as a bit of a risk now, as that's sort of starting to become come to an end as there's more LEDs and HIDs fitted at factory. But the actual fact is that our car park's turning over slower and slower, especially in the current times, as we all know, which is a bit uncertain. There's people buying less new cars. So whilst there's still going to be plenty of cars that are coming out with full LED headlamps and the like, there's actually going to be still plenty of halogen
of course.
globes. I think it's really important to note. One of the things about halogen is it's actually a really efficient way of doing lighting. So that's in terms both of service as well, and especially with older vehicles. So, for example, if you've got a vehicle with a H7, tested hours, it's sort of 500 to 700 hours. You're probably going to get 2 years out of a set of H7s,
right?
Depending on your driving, and then you can replace it for sort of $20, $25 per globe. If your full LED headlamps fail and you're outside your warranty, it's sort of $3,000 to $5,000. And I actually do see quite a lot of them driving around on the road, and I think to myself, geez, I hope you're in warranty, mate. Otherwise, you're going to be shocked at how expensive it's going to be.
I've heard the rumours that they are quite expensive, and some people aren't aware of the expense attached to them as well.
Absolutely. There's plenty of these people who think, I've bought this, BMW or, expensive Mercedes, and these lights are going to last me forever. But it is actually not true. They do last a very, very long time. But in the long run, you're probably going to be better off still with a humble H7 that you're changing every 2 to 4 years, rather than getting stung with a $3,000 or $5,000 bill
Yeah.
that then obviously keeps you off the road. Because that's probably the other thing that people don't realise is, halogen globes are in abundance. You can go to any auto store in Australia and you can get a H7.
Yeah.
But if your BMW X5, 2019 model headlamp goes, you might be stuck for a couple of months while they get one from Europe. So, yes, LED is coming, but it is a great way to light. But the humble halogen bulb definitely still has a place in the market.
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of a misconception with some of the general public looking at the LED and probably relating it through the fact that, I can walk into Bunnings and get an LED light for my house. And they probably have that misconception from the automotive side of things. It is very bespoke at this early stage. But when we're talking about, as globes evolve further, what about, do you think there's going to be potential for LED retrofit?
Yeah, so obviously, like I said before, LED retrofit is around, and it's evolving. It's when you go overseas, there's more and more people popping up making these globes. And I think that's another thing that's different where, really there's only 3 companies that make good halogen globes, whereas there's lots of people that make LED globes. And the thing that really gets me is it's so unregulated.
Yeah.
And that's because there's actually no laws. So whilst we say on all our packaging it's not ADR approved, that's only because there is no ADR to approve it against. So the standard says if you're replacing a H4 product, your product must have a filament in it. And by having LEDs, you automatically don't have a filament, which means you're not compliant. So until that law gets changed, there's only so far LED retrofits will go. That law would have to be changed over in Europe, probably. Yeah. And at the moment, I think people have got bigger fish to fry than a little law that's going to make LED globes.
Comment of the podcast series so far, I think.
No, so again, we get asked all the time, how come they're not compliant? How come they're not ADR approved? And quite frankly, anyone who tells you they've got an ADR approved globe is lying to your face.
Yep.
So it's really important to note that there is no way of having a mass-produced retrofit LED globe that is approved in a range of vehicles. Okay. It's just not possible.
Well, let's go in a slightly different direction then. Let's go back to the future as such, and let's crystal ball ahead a bit further. Do you think we'll ever see a time where globes will be a non-serviceable item?
I think yes, eventually, but I don't think 2040 is the time. I think in 2040 there'll still be plenty of vehicles running around that are still running around today. It's just the way the economy in the world moves. There will be a day. And there will be plenty of vehicles where they are they already are non-serviceable in lots of vehicles, especially the tail lights. There's lots of vehicles with full LED tail lights which are non-serviceable and don't need to be. But having the whole market be non-serviceable, we just, we look out until 2050 in our planning, and that's not in our plan. We see there'll be a significant decrease, but it won't be. There'll still be globes being sold. Don't you worry about that.
Well, I come back to the house side of things, and people putting a globe in the ceiling, and you have smart lighting, active lighting, and so forth. And we are progressing at such an incredible rate with technology. I think it's fair to say, we talk about the DIY serviceability of these things. There's going to be a long road to travel before it becomes obsolete, isn't it?
Absolutely, and even more so as I would say the older the vehicle are much easier to service yourself. So, if you've got an old car with a pair of H4 globes in it, pretty easy to change yourself. You can pop down to one of your local auto stores and just grab a globe off the shelf, go home and fit it yourself. Yeah. That's no problems. The newer vehicles, my wife's got a VF Commodore and it is a prick. You have to take the wheels off. You have to do all sorts of things. So,
replace the light bulb through the exhaust pipe. Well, let's go. Let's round this one out. And I've got a really cool question for you right at the very end. And that is, there's a lot of mechanics and business owners listening to us at the moment. What are some of the facts that we don't often know or seldom hear about Narva?
So I'll take you back, and this is not just about Narva, this is about LED globes in general.
Yep.
So one of the misconceptions about LED globes is that they are so much brighter than standard globes, which is true, but not 100% true. So one of the things that's really important is we test all our globes on the same scale in terms of how much more light they put on the road. So, for example, a plus 150 is measured at all different points on the road to provide 150%, so twice, and another 50% more light in those areas. If you measure even the best LED globe, they're still only getting a plus 50 or a plus 70 in those measured points. So if you measure it against a halogen, it's still only about, so our premium level globes, they're still only a plus 60 against a halogen, where we can go up to 150, and there's even talk of a plus 200 coming along. So as we said there, because there's no regulation, a lot of people will claim just the light output as their plus figure. So they'll say,
okay.
This is a plus 180 globe.
Yep.
Now, the issue is a halogen globe is actually capped on how many lumens it can have to be ADR compliant.
Right.
Once you take that cap off, you could put 10,000 lumens out of the globe. Right. But it's not about how much light comes out of the globe. Cool. It's about where that light then goes. So we measure at the points where you need to see. So that's up 50 metres, 75 metres up on the left. So that's where you're looking all the time. It's also where someone might dart out from behind a car.
Yes.
And again, even the best LED globes we've tested, which are the ones we sell, obviously, are only about a plus 60. If you're looking for the best light, and this is something people don't know, a Narva Platinum plus 130 or a plus 150 is still going to be the best to drive behind, even compared to any LED retrofit globe. Now, that obviously excludes your OE or full vehicle LED upgrades. So, for example, if you've got a Jeep or something and you've got a 7-inch round headlamp, the Narva, 72104's headlamp, that'll give you a much better output. But equally, it's only available in those few sizes. So I think it's really important to note. So obviously, we've recapped there. Whilst you'll get the life out of a LED globe, you won't get as much light, and it's obviously not road legal. So still, halogen performance globes are a great way to go. And as I said before, if you think about how much driving you do at night and how many accidents happen at night, a set of Platinum plus 130s or Narva plus 150 globes, which will probably set you about $100 back for a pair, depending on whether you get them if they're on special or not. You're probably going to have to replace them every 12 to 18 months.
Yep.
But for my family, I choose to keep them safe, and that's the globes that I run in my car.
I always run a new financial litmus test over things. Now, work out how much you pay for it, and then work out how many times you use it, and that'll give you an idea price per use, and that's an absolute bargain. Look, you've given us some incredible insights into the world of Narva and globes, and really thank you very much for coming on today's show, James. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on again. And, if any of our listeners have any follow-up questions about anything we've discussed today, they can go ahead and reach out to Narva via the Mechanic.com.au community. Thanks for tuning into the Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair professionals. If you want to unlock a whole host of trade-only resources, including our private community, competitions, educational content, job opportunities, training, troubleshooting, and much, much more, go ahead and create a free account now at Mechanic.com.au. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Mechanic.com.au podcast soon.